Politics these days are pretty contentious. But one thing everyone in Maine seems to agree on is this: Mainers pay way too much for energy. Whether it's skyrocketing electric bills or the cost to heat your home or business, energy costs are one of the biggest things holding our economy back. Our guest this week lives and breathes the issue every day. Matt Jacobson is a longtime Maine business advocate, and he's director of sales and marketing at Summit Natural Gas. Matt and I will dig into the energy cost issue and take a look at some of the things that we're doing as a state that may be making the problem worse, not better. And we'll talk solutions for lowering those energy costs and helping boost Maine's economy. I'm Jonathan Bush, and this is Maine For Keeps. So the young Matt Jacobson is running as a huge railroad job, operations leadership job in Chicago, and he moves to Maine, not the largest railroad market in America. Talk us through.
Yeah, well, I started in the railroad at CSX, and in that role, it was a marketing and sales role, and we were a liaison between the spin-off railroads and the big railroads. So in 82, the Staggers Act happened. We franchised a lot of railroads. And so one of the railroad companies that I had liaison with owned the St. Lawrence and Atlantic. And so they hired me to run the SLR. So I ran the SLR, went from Portland up to Montreal. And I did that for 5 years. And then Canadian National Illinois Central said, "Hey, we like what you're doing. Come Chicago." And I did that for 5 years. And I learned that I really didn't want to be a corporate executive. And my son came and really didn't want to raise kids in Chicago. And
you had the taste of Maine before.
I had that, yeah.
And you're like, I got to raise my kids in Maine.
I can't do Chicago. So
if we could just get everybody to get pregnant and have a little time with a kid in Maine, our GDP would be off the charts.
We win. Exactly right. That's exactly right. And then I had an opportunity to run Maine Company. And so I came back to do that.
That was a great run at Maine Company, where you were bringing you're essentially the booster group for the state of Maine economy, right?
Well, it's a privately funded company that does economic development, business development. So we try to attract businesses to Maine and try to help the ones that are here. In fact, that's where you and I first met.
That's right.
Yeah, Athena Health.
Athena Health to Maine, fulfilling my childhood fantasy of being able to live and work in Maine.
Do you remember when we made that happen? Do you remember the final meeting where you committed finally?
I hope it wasn't the one where Baldacci came.
No. We had met. We met in the facility, the old MBNA building and the Athena Health building now in Belfast. And you had just flown in. You and your team had just flown in from the Rossignol facility in Vermont.
Okay.
And that was the competition. And I remember we sat around the room and you said, "Hey, we got to make this. It's even. What are you going to do for us? It's even. We can't. We don't know." And so I took the town manager. We were looking out at the parking lot. And it was a spring day, and we were looking out at the parking lot and I said to Joe, "What can we do?" And I looked at him and I said, "How about offer plow the parking lot?" You remember this? And Joe said, "Just a minute." He called his public works guy. And then we came back in the room. We said, "All right, Jonathan, we'll plow your parking lot." And he said, "Done." And that was it. I don't think they ever did plow your parking lot, but that was the deal.
I hope when I said done, I had some other scheme in my head besides parking lot plowing.
Well, I think you wanted to make the deal. You just wanted one more thing. It was...
I think I knew where I was going to end up from hello.
Well, we didn't know that. We didn't treat it as such, but that was, and I think in that experience for you, especially, that was such an insight into how Maine welcomes or doesn't new companies and how that landscape has changed over time. I'm not sure you could bring Athena Health here now. I don't know.
No, it was a very different environment, economically. And I think you're right. I think it would be harder. I don't know. I was pretty committed. And of course they had the exit of MBNA. So there was just like,
there was some
1,000 people without jobs, poof. And their chairs were there and their cubicles were there. That was like really lucky.
But even then, there was a lot of discussion about the parking lots, and I can't imagine, that if you had to park people now. I mean, it's just such a very different environment.
Well, now they never. I mean, they're all there, but they're all working on Zoom. They're all working from home,
Right,
so it
right.
doesn't matter as much. I'm sure the entire pitch is different. We had that incredible rise of attention during COVID, where people who were doing information jobs, Zoom type workers, who were moving to Maine and stopped because housing prices shot up. And so they sort of hit a wall where we ski jumped housing prices during those early 20s. And so people finally, we just put the brakes on it.
And we won't build. You can't build houses. So the only houses, I mean, the towns. I mean, it gets into sort of the energy side, but
Yeah.
One of the, Summit Natural Gas, for whom I work, we have operations in Colorado and Missouri and Oklahoma, and our biggest footprint's in Arkansas. We have about 600,000 customers, and they laugh at me when the towns that I serve actually have a limit on how many building permits they'll issue in a year. I think Cumberland is 30, something like that.
Say that again.
They limit how many housing starts they can allow per year. So I think Cumberland and Falmouth are in the 30s or 60s, and now I have to go back and look. But my colleague who is in Missouri, they'll get a 300 house development and they build it. Whereas here, if we get 15 houses in a development, that's a big development for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason why is we're overregulated. And so what happens if I can only sell one kind of house? The high end market is not saturated yet, so I build high end houses because I can only build 15 of them. And so we never get low end housing because we haven't reached a peak in our high end yet.
Saturation that's interesting. And what I was watching the UNH poll recently of sentiment on Maine by Mainers, and housing was number one, biggest issue, but number two was energy, electricity cost, and heating cost just being so high compared to our peer states. And I know we're rural, so obviously distribution, if you've got 10 people getting the benefit of a line of wire versus 1,000 people, the cost of keeping that wire is tougher. But it's in manufacturing of electricity and of heat, we also seem to lose before we get into distribution.
Right. I think you got to look at your energy bill is two things, right? It's distribution and it's the energy itself, right? And so what you talk about, the notion of, it's rural, so you got to pay more. Yeah, but we're no more rural than Arkansas or a lot of other states. So you're going to, that to me is a wash. If you're losing on distribution costs, then you probably weren't going to win in the first place. Our problem is core energy costs. Let me give you an example. So last winter in Arkansas, or maybe it was 2 winters ago, there was a very cold winter storm. And I'm privy to this because I'm on the calls. And and most people know that the cost of the electricity, the cost of the natural gas is just passed through. The Public Utilities Commission has made it so utilities, we don't make any money on the gas, and the electric company doesn't make any money on the electricity. We make money on the distribution. That's our revenue model. So on the gas, routinely in winter in Maine, we pay between $18 and $20 a decatherm for natural gas. Okay. That doesn't have to mean decatherms don't have to mean, but it got so cold in Arkansas and the price spiked to $7 and they were apoplectic. So when you think about our normal winter is 18, their normal winter is about 5, and $7 was a real anomaly. So if you're a manufacturing company, that's such a big delta.
And this is natural gas that wasn't born in either Maine or Arkansas. So
no, but
why are we upside down so bad?
Okay, so there's a couple of issues. One is proximity to the fields. Okay, so Arkansas is close to Texas, lots of natural gas in Texas, and they pipe it over. We're very close to Pennsylvania, and natural gas in Pennsylvania is cheap, and we pipe it over. The problem is New Hampshire and Massachusetts have decided for about the last 20 years not to permit any new capacity. Okay, so they built big pipes when they built them for transportation of natural gas from Pennsylvania to, say, Maine. And they stop in New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut and all along the way. Well, as time happened in 20 years or 30 years passed by, growth happens. And now on a peak winter day, we use all the gas that pipe will allow. It's like your hose. You only put so much water through it, right? So we're at that point. So over the last 20 years, 3 different companies have proposed new transportation pipelines from Pennsylvania to New England. All 3 have been denied permit by Massachusetts and New York. Okay. So we have artificially constricted the supply of natural gas into New England. Okay. So that's point 1. So we need just our natural growth, let alone any new growth. Just our organic growth has caused the demand to go up, and we're not responding to that because we can't get permit. But now, as that demand happened, there's still, you got to have natural gas. And why do you have to have natural gas? 2 reasons. One, yes, the manufacturers and people that use it for heating. But the second part is about 60% of the electricity in New England comes from natural gas generated facilities. And that's happened because we've closed coal and we've closed nuclear. And so we've put more of a load onto our gas generators. So they still need it because we still need the electricity. So instead of using piped natural gas from Pennsylvania, I can't get the pipe. So there are LNG terminals. There's Everett Terminal in Boston, and then there's the terminal up at Sable Island up in New Brunswick. These LNG are these terminals are outfitted to take liquid natural gas on specific liquid natural gas ships. They're super cooled, and then when they put it in the pipe, it gets atmospheric pressure, and off you go. So where do you get that liquefied natural gas? There's a lot of conversation now around LNG and the big markets in the U.S. exporting, and now with the new administration, they've sort of kicked the impediments out of permitting new LNG terminals. All that's great, except that there's something called the Jones Act. And you can't have a ship that's not flagged in America go from American port to American port. Well, there are no American flagged LNG ships. They're all foreign flagged.
Boy, this journey, this Maine For Keeps, I have run into more self-inflicted wounds.
Oh, let me tell you how bad it is, Jonathan.
Reaching into the mouth of victory and pulling out defeat.
So for natural gas, for Summit, just for my little company in Maine, during the summer, all of our natural gas comes from the U.S. It all comes from the Algonquin and the Maritimes and Northeast Pipeline. All comes from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, from the U.S. And it's cheap, and we're competitive. In the winter, about 35% of our gas comes from LNG. And most of that comes from Sable Island. And all of that gas is foreign gas. So we're buying gas. 35% of our gas comes from Trinidad and Tobago this year. 3 years ago, before they attacked Ukraine, it was Russian gas, where we were actually buying LNG from Russia. We buy LNG from Trinidad and Tobago, when 300 miles from where I'm sitting is one of the biggest natural gas fields, the cheapest gas in the world. And yet New England politicians have artificially constricted our ability to get it.
It seems like this is pretty clear sort of Commerce Clause violation by New York and Massachusetts, that we could easily win a lawsuit. Hey, you are trapping our commerce here.
Yeah, easily is an interesting word.
We sue? I mean, have we as Maine sued?
Everyone's afraid to it. I've had a couple of conversations with some senior executives here recently where that very idea has been bounced around. It would be a food fight with the environmentalists, right? I mean, this would be a huge case. I think now's the time to bring it, especially with the new Energy Secretary, Chris Wright. They would probably join the suit, but I think that's what it's going to do. I think we need to do that.
I mean, $18 compared to $7, that's brutal. I mean, that is an unbelievable sort of environmental penny loafer on the throat of people who, for whom energy cost matters.
Well, and that magnitude is the same thing in electricity.
So let's go there. So first of all, that you just described distribution and manufacture. There is just wholesale purchase. Distribution is pipeline use. Last question on this before we get over to electricity. How are we doing in terms of last mile distribution of natural gas within Maine once we get it here, setting aside another trunk going down to Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So Summit's the only company in Maine that's actually looking to convert people off of oil and bring natural gas down their street. Right. So we try to find neighborhoods that want us, and then we'll build to it. That's getting harder and harder, really, from a political perspective, because there's a lot of people that oppose us, mostly in government.
And I mean, isn't natural gas the way the United States were able to exceed the Paris Climate Accord standards? All natural gas?
Yeah. I mean, there's two issues here. There's one is efficacy, right? This is, your available opportunities that are reliable, affordable, and resilient are oil, which 60% or 50% of homes in Maine still use.
Okay.
Natural gas, which is about a 40% benefit from a CO2 emission versus oil. And that's your choice, right? People say heat pumps, but heat pumps now, I mean, the governor's energy office has a website you can go look where they list the cost per MMBTU of all the different sources. And on that site, you can see the gap between heat pumps, electric is growing between gas and oil because the cost of electricity is so expensive.
Is this sort of this ideal? Like, I don't want better, I want best. I don't want better, I want,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Jonathan. It's we don't like fossil fuels, so we're going to pretend like we can just turn it off.
So a 40% improvement in emissions is turned down in exchange for a fantasy of no emissions ever.
Right. And what happens is this was the whole Rockland story, the whole Dragon Cement.
We got to talk about that one. So good. So Dragon Cement closes. Explain to me the process. They apply.
No. So when I first came to Summit, my job was to see if I couldn't exponentially grow our customers. And so the only place in Maine that didn't have, industrial place in Maine that didn't have real access to natural gas was the Midcoast. And there's a lot of industry up and down the Midcoast that it all uses bunker six, all of it, except for Dragon Cement, which used coal, coke, carpet, and tires. They were permitted to burn,
which are very clean. I mean, when you burn a tire, it's like crystal.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so we went to them, and I was trying to look for a project. We went to the big industrial users because that our model is that's the anchor.
Then you can put little spurs off.
Yeah. And we get the neighborhoods, we get everything else, but got to have that big anchor. Well, they were in the throes of a internal conversation about how they lower their emissions, and we could have replaced all of that junk they were using with natural gas, still created enough heat for them to make concrete, and would have saved their carbon footprint close to 80%. So they were enthusiastic. And so wasn't every other industrial company along the line. And we thought we were in good standing because at the time the governor put out, Maine Won't Wait. They're now down to Maine Won't Wait 2.0, but the whole climate initiative. And in there, it very specifically said the big industry needs to be converted to natural gas. And it's in the report. And so we thought that we'd get support from the administration and that, this would be a relatively easy sell. And I got the money from our board to do it. It was about a $100 million project. We got the customers. I had enough to go. And as we were socializing it in the different communities, went to Belfast first, and they unanimously supported the idea. All the other communities did as well. And we got to Rockland, and there was a real resistance. I think manufactured resistance, and there was 2 or 3 counselors that were adamant that we shouldn't have natural gas at all. That this was just burial insurance, and they wanted to get rid of it.
What year was this?
2001.
Okay.
2002. Yeah. And so a couple 3 years ago, and so
21.
our company,
2021.
21. Yeah.
Okay.
21. So we we were met with an extraordinary backlash, and we'd never had that before. Most every place we've gone,
you had to be a little surprised, right? I mean,
shocked. I mean, let me tell you how bad it was. they said we're going to do a public hearing. So we gathered a couple of nice letters from, we do a lot of volunteer work. And so the American Cancer Society sent a letter about how great we were as a corporate neighbor. And, lots of Summit people have volunteered for their annual drive. And this is a nice letter. And the next woman up says, well, it's ironic that the American Cancer Society would support them since Summit causes all the cancer. It's like
natural gas causes cancer now.
Well, that was her, so we were the devil incarnate. And so we took a step back and rightly, I think, our executives said, look, we're not going to go where we're not wanted. And while they don't have any ministerial authority over the permitting process, we don't want to fight a city. We'll go where we want. And frankly, it wasn't too long after that we invested $2.5 billion in Arkansas. So, we go where we're wanted, and we weren't wanted, and we didn't want to fight to be wanted. Although a lot of the community did want us, the folks in charge didn't. And so we thought, that's a family squabble we don't want to get into. You guys figure it out. And so we walked away. A year later, Dragon Cement announced that they were leaving because they couldn't have access to natural gas.
Yeah.
And they closed it. So
that to me is like a quintessential, I've been collecting this wall of shame of like self-inflicted wounds against our own economic growth. And that one has got to be at the top of the list. The idea.
But Jonathan, it's
forbidding. So now I wonder where our cement comes from. Probably all those clean burning cement plants in China.
Virginia and Quebec. So we've added costs I understand it's 40% more expensive when you get it from further away. So every project in Maine is more expensive now as a result. So buildings, roads, it's more expensive for the private sector. It's more expensive for the state. It's just, it was dumb. But I would suggest that this has been a slow motion train wreck for a long time.
Yeah. What do you think? If you follow sort of the degrees of Kevin Bacon back up the food chain, what are the early kind of, and you ran for governor on this, like what were the early wall of shame harbingers that, because today when I say the words learned helplessness, I get huge nods. Oh, our legislators settled into learned helplessness. Our business community settled into learned helplessness.
And I think it's very, very appropriate. Yeah.
When you go back and look back at the arc of all this time you've been involved in public policy here, what is like the earliest?
So I took over the St. Lawrence and Atlantic in 1995.
Okay.
I was 36-year-old president of a railroad. Man, this was like dream country. How many little boys have a railroad set, right? And I got a big one.
You got a big set.
I got a big set. And when I started, there were 23 paper mills in Maine that were on a railroad. And we came up with this novel idea of origin transload to compete with the other railroads. So we would truck it to our railroad, put it in a railroad car, and ship it out on our lines rather than direct load it onto a railroad car on the other lines. And so we took a haircut to make that work. But man, did we get volume. And so I knew all of the paper mill people because we were pitching them all. We did inbound chemicals, outbound paper, 23 paper mills. And then I went to Chicago and came back in 5 years. And there were something like 15 paper mills.
Okay.
Today, there are 3.
Yeah.
And that is really a testament to why Dragon left. If you go back and look at why they left, it was electricity costs. Yes, there were some raw material issues. You could grow a tree faster in South America. But the problem was electricity costs and power costs and gas costs and ability to even get natural gas. Sappi, which is in Skowhegan, which is, I think, the biggest customer in New England for natural gas, didn't even have access to natural gas until Summit came in 2013, right? So that lack of infrastructure, we lost all our paper mills. And it was the same resistance that we have now to natural gas in the state.
Yep.
It started back then. And so to me, this has been a very slow motion tale of energy costs. And when an innovative company like Summit comes and says, hey, look, we'll build pipe to underserved areas. We built pipe to Madison Paper. Of course, they closed. And now the Go Lab, they operate under a different name now, but the new
insulation
company up in Madison. So we serve them, but it's a startup. It's not an established paper mill. It's, we made a pretty big investment. And so, we're hoping we're supporting them as much as we can, but that's sort of, to me, the arc, right? If you look at our paper industry,
Yeah. It seems like every industry, of course, eventually declines. Like we don't read the newspaper anymore. Like there's going to be consolidation, but in other parts of the world, it seems like there's more reinvestment. Like what's the lemonade that you make with this lemon? We don't manufacture houses much. We have a little tiny corridor.
Right. But I think we forget that, there's still cardboard and there's still wrapping paper and there's a lot of paper that's still made and consumed in this country. We walked away from it, but it's worse than just the paper mills because we had this manufacturing base machine shops sprung up all over to help fix those paper machines.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So all those guys were, fabricating parts.
It's an economic complex.
It was a big ecosystem, right? And then the other thing you had, Jonathan, that I think is, really the crime because, I think the American dream is that you leave it better for your kids.
Yeah.
Your kids have a better opportunity than you had. Well, there are no headquarters companies here. There are no paper mills running trainee programs for kids.
Right.
Right. So if you want to do, an internship, and I have a daughter who's doing one this summer in Connecticut. Sure. In an insurance company.
No, the Maine For Keeps Maine dream. The Maine dream is you can do the American dream, but you don't have to leave Maine to do it. That's our whole, what would it look like if that were true?
Yeah. I mean, we have robbed these kids of any opportunity, and it starts there. And people have this, I don't know, rigid ideology around fossil fuels that all it's really done is made us uncompetitive.
Yeah. I do feel like the idea of saying, carbon neutral and allowing one of the ways of getting there is crushing growth to be a mistaken goal. Like you could say, hey, we're going to quadruple renewable energy and do it. But the idea of doing it by stepping on the throat of other things that work and that, as you point out, are 40% cleaner than what we're doing today, they got the goal wrong.
Oh, by the way, that stuff doesn't work. If you look at offshore wind, just, that's the darling.
You can give us offshore, but then I want to go to the fart eater plant, which is my favorite example of this.
Yeah. Okay. So the Far East, the offshore wind is now the darling. So, and it's always, we never talk about what that really means, right? It's always, we're going to do offshore wind and that's the panacea. So ISO New England last year modeled the offshore wind that the New England governors have promised. Okay, and what they came up with was that it would, and not from a financial perspective. They did some modeling on that and the other, but just from an area perspective, they said that it would take, I believe it was 5,400 square miles of ocean to meet the demands of the offshore wind that's been promised. Just for context, the state of Connecticut is 5,500 square miles.
Right.
So we're talking about the wholesale industrialization of the ocean. First of all, nobody's ever done it at that scale anywhere in the world. Everywhere it's ever been tried, it makes your grid more expensive. Ørsted, the biggest company in the world, just walked away from New Jersey. On the table was an offer that they would buy energy for 20 years at 3 times the average rate that New Jerseyans were paying now. And they walked away so you make money doing it.
Because they couldn't make money doing it.
Right. And now there's a new study out of Norway that just came out this week, or I guess the first part of March, that said that the wind turbulence behind these big turbines, you got to understand, these are as tall as the Eiffel Tower, and the wingspan's as big as a 737 for one blade. Yeah. So these are enormous machines. That the wake turbulence behind that is 45 miles. And they have to rethink how they place how much area they need for these wind farms because it's degrading the efficiency of the ones that are closer than 45 miles. So that 5,400 square miles is easily doubled. So you're talking about the wholesale industrialization of the New England coast. I don't think that's what people want. I don't.
I mean, for me, I think they look cool, but I'm not ready to make everybody pay more. What if we said, look, this is what it costs us per kilowatt hour. If you want to make it with wind, go for it. But this is what it costs us. Feel free to step up at that number.
Here's the problem or I would add one caveat, not the problem, but here's the one caveat.
Yeah.
So wind works, let's be generous. It works 30% of the time out in the ocean. Let's just be generous.
Yeah.
So 70% of the time, I have to have something else.
Battery, natural gas.
Battery isn't going to do it for batteries last about 4 minutes now. We don't have the technology to make them last longer than that for grid scale application, right? So you got to have a natural gas plant that turns on when the wind's not blowing. Well, here's the problem, and you know this better than anybody. Having been CEO of a couple of companies, if you're going to make widgets, and I gotta spend 100% of the capital to build my widget factory, but I can only work it 70% of the time,
or 30.
Then you got to sell those widgets for more money because you still got to pay 100% of your costs.
Yeah,
right. That capital. So what wind does is that natural gas factory who can run 24/7 with like 98% uptime can't do that. So they can't make their cost of capital with 100% output. So they run less efficiently, but I still got to make 100% of the revenue on 70% of the output. So it makes the energy costs go up even when the wind is blowing, right? So that's the problem, is because you got to have that plant. So you got to pay him to be idle. And that's why electricity costs go up everywhere wind is employed at a grid scale. And that's happened in the United States and California and in Texas.
What percentage of Maine power today is wind power, domestic wind power?
Well, it's hard. See, Maine power is a hard thing to break out. We belong to ISO New England, right? And so it really doesn't matter what we produce. It's what ISO New England produces because it all goes on the grid. Right now, ISO New England, about 4% is wind and solar combined.
4%.
About 4.
Okay.
And about 60% is natural gas. About 20% is nuclear, and then the rest is hydro. And if you go to the ISO New England site, it's the way they do it. They put renewables, and in renewables is rubbish and dump gas. So and wood, and that's all renewable.
Those are all called renewable. But
yeah,
not hydropower over 100 megawatts, right?
Right. Well, that's a whole other conversation. But hydro gets its own category. But they're trying to make nice with their masters. So that's what they do.
What percent of the retail houses in Maine today? I don't. But what percent of addresses have access to natural gas today? 8. 50% are in urban or semi-urban settings, right? So, the other 50, I don't blame you for not dragging a natural gas pipe to Jackman, Maine.
Well, we're trying that. I mean, we brought gas in the last 15 years to the Kennebec Valley, to Cumberland and Falmouth and Yarmouth.
So why 8? What? I don't get it. Why so low?
Well, because it grew up on oil, and most utilities are, there's hunters and farmers. Most utilities are farmers. They have this infrastructure. They maintain the infrastructure, and it's an annuity, and they don't think about growing. Summit's model is very different. Our model is, hey, let's see where we can grow. Where can we build new pipe? Where can we add economic development? Because we thought that was a real core part of our mission.
I'll be honest. I thought you guys would be seen more of an environmental darling than to be blocked.
And that's all changed in the last 5 years. Really, really in the last 5 years.
So in the last 5 years, you went from being an economic darling to being the bad guy because you're not solar and wind?
That's right.
So they don't want it to be too easy to make a 40% environmental improvement and a 50% improvement in cost.
They don't even want to have the conversation. It's fossil fuels are bad. We got to stop them.
So we're at 4%. Are we going to wait until we get to 40 or 50 or whatever with solar? How's solar going? I hear a lot about the cost of buying solar exceeding the cost of buying nuclear or hydro by large percentages.
Yeah. Here's the problem with solar. There's a couple problems. First of it is 90% or more of solar panels in the world are made in China. Why is that? Because it's a silicon panel, right? Well, in order to make that, you essentially boil sand. It takes an enormous amount of energy. So the Chinese make it with coal. 60% of their grid is coal. And so they're using cheap coal to make solar panels to send to us. Okay. Now there are some places where they work, right? The desert, right? Now the best you can have for solar is 50% uptime.
Right, because of this pesky nighttime problem. Yeah.
That night happens. In Maine, it's about 13% uptime because of snow and cold and
Year-round
cloud.
uptime.
Yeah, it's about 13%. So
And does both sides agree? I mean, is that a argued number, or does everyone's like, yeah,
yeah, no, a lot of people will obfuscate, but yeah, the science is the science. I mean, there's
but
really
both
no.
sides agree, yeah, it's 13%. Okay.
You'll get. They won't do it publicly, but yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
it's
when you
only
ask them,
21. Okay, some
yeah,
number that's way less than half, right?
it's not 50. And all you got to think is imagine how many days are cloudy and how many days have snow on your roof. That's how many days that solar won't work.
Right.
So the problem, it's that same problem. It's the intermittency of these panels is a feature, not a bug. And so I don't know when that 13% is going to be. I can't predict it with any degree of precision. And I've got to have something else to back up for the 87% of the time. But I can't tell them when they're going to run and when they're not going to run. And so they've got to put the capital in, but they don't know what their output's going to be. That's really hard to get capital. And so what you say is, okay, well, I'll charge you more for the opportunity to run me when you need me. And that's what's happened. And that's another reason why our electricity prices.
I see. And if you don't guarantee a certain number of therms or whatever,
But electrons, whatever
then
it
I'm going to
is.
charge you a keepage fee just for keeping the thing up
And
and
that's
running.
the best case. That's the best case. What's happening in a lot of places, it happened in Texas and their legislature had to correct it, was that if you don't, I'm not going to build because I am disadvantaged in the auction for electricity. I'm just not going to build a thermal generation.
Are you aware of people trying to build new electrical generation plants in Maine?
I'm aware there's one company that's trying to put a gas turbine in to do that.
Are they?
I know that there was look at trying to bring the generator. It's a gas turbine up at the J Mill to bring that on. I've talked to the developers up there. So far, I haven't seen those come back yet. And the new development just couldn't get through the PUC. They wouldn't permit it.
The permitting. So you can't get permitted to build one. Okay. And is there an argument for why? Have you ever had somebody explain to you why the state's not permitting natural gas electric?
Natural gas bad. That's about as far as that's as sophisticated as it gets,
Okay.
right?
Is that official policy or is that more like whisper policy?
Oh, that's official. I mean, there isn't any. I mean, the Maine Can't Wait talks about electrification. Their goal of. I mean, Jonathan, right now I have to compete with the government. They're giving rebates for heat pumps, like $18,000 or $8,000 per heat pump. And that and so when I go in, what's my value prop? Well, they gave me a rebate. What did you give me? I'm competing with my government on that kind of thing. So yeah, it's absolutely policy.
And heat pump moves you sort of 100% electric at that point.
Yes.
I got it.
Yes. Which is 60% natural gas. So this winter, because we couldn't even get enough LNG, there were a couple of days in January where fully 10% of our electricity was being generated by oil.
Yeah. We ran out of the other sources.
Yeah. Just couldn't get enough.
Got it. Let's talk about the fart eater.
Yeah.
The dream of every environmentalist, including me, by the way, that all the methane from the cows, you plug an electric alligator clips up to the cow's ass.
Well, were it so, we have contracted.
Yeah,
we have contracted with 7,000 cows in Maine. Each cow has a contract for their poop, and so we collect that manure from 7 different farms in Maine, and we bring it to the Flood Brothers farm in Clinton, Maine, where we have put a digester. What's a digester? It's a big stomach.
That's the word.
Yeah, it's a big stomach, right? It's a big mechanical stomach, and so we put the poop in there. It takes about 30 days, and we get a couple of products. We get methane, which we put right on the pipe, which is right now about 40% of our residential demand. So close to 2,000 homes are being powered by that gas on our pipeline.
Wow!
So it's not nothing.
40% of Clinton households or of all
No, no, no.
households in Maine?
Summit Natural Gas, our residential load. So
Wow.
yeah. Now our industrial load, in fairness, is much greater,
Sure, of
but
course.
it gives you context of what's possible here.
But I would think people would love that. Hey, I'm heating my house on the methane from.
There's nuance to that, right? So the other thing we produce is what do they call them? Well, tax credits, and those are bought by companies out in California, so they can say they bought the renewable gas. The gas goes into our system, and at that point, it's in our system. But you buy the credit.
Oh, I
right?
see. So you're claiming like a carbon credit or whatever. You're
Exactly the
claiming
same thing.
that reclaimed as yours,
That's right.
even though
That's
you're
right.
in California.
Right. That gas went into my system, but they didn't have to buy it. So, but the theory is that, the domino effect. So also what comes out of there is a fertilizer that we give back to the farmers that they put on their field. So it's for them free fertilizer, and a solid that's a bedding that they don't have to buy sand and bedding for their cattle anymore. So this was a huge win for Maine dairy farms. Huge win for the environment is we found another way. It's a huge win for reliable and resilient gas sources that are diversified. We now are making our own gas here in Maine. And even so, it took 15 months to get the PUC to allow us for Peaks, that our subsidiary, to sell that gas to us, to Summit Natural Gas. 15 months for the Public Utilities Commission to figure out what that contract looks like. West Virginia just did one in 2 months. So, time is money. And we were pretty committed to this, but it ended up costing a lot more to do because of those kinds of delays.
Wow. Is that normal here? I mean, you're a multi-state organization. Do you have sort of round numbers on the difference in permitting and time in Maine versus your other states?
Oh, Arkansas is a third of what Maine is.
A third.
Yeah, but part of it is they know what they want, and they have written their regulations around that. Maine just says no to everything now, right?
Is there a difference in the percentage of permits that are actually prospectively reviewed by Maine versus other states, which just say these are the rules?
Yeah, I don't know that data, but I think part of the problem is self-fulfilling, right? If you know it's too hard, you just won't even apply anymore.
Learned helplessness, yeah.
Yeah, that's what Maine is really driven. We just don't even ask anymore.
So we've described this incredible kind of spaghetti handshake of constraints and learned helplessness.
Yep. I think that's a brilliant observation.
If you were to pick one sort of little pry bar, one purchase point to throw your weight on to try to reverse this learning of helplessness cycle where energy in Maine is concerned, where would you start? Where do you think the first breath of fresh air comes from?
I would demand that any energy regulation ought to consider affordability, reliability, and resilience before it considered anything else.
Yeah.
So anything that wasn't more affordable, more reliable, and more resilient, well, that wouldn't be something we'd focus on.
Yeah.
And if we started with that framework, I think a lot of the nonsense goes away. But we have, nobody has looked at what does a customer need, right? Nobody has looked at what our businesses need. And I talk about this all the time, but you go to that Sappi paper mill, and it's enormous. I mean, this is a world-class, state-of-the-art facility.
Yeah.
And I hear people talking about demand shifting, and legislators talk about demand shifting, peak shaving, and what they're talking about is cutting off demand when the peak gets too high, so we don't have to build the church for Easter, right? So they're talking about turning off places like Sappi as a way to manage our energy flow. And to me, that's just absolutely backwards. We ought to be building an energy system that provides, affordable and available energy to anybody that wants to use it, so we can drive our economy and create a standard of living.
That reminds me of Maine's recent experience with retrading when the power corridor was cut. Whoever it was got the permit, started to do the work to develop the corridor, and then a group of Mainers got together and say, actually, we want to take that back. Have you had run-ins at Summit with retrading? Like you do the work, you wait 100 years, you get the permit, and then someone says, wait, actually, no. Or
our experience with that is probably not so nefarious, but it is interesting. We will tear up a road to put a pipe in, and each city will have some standard of restoration, and so we repave it and fix the patch, and you can see. A lot of times we try to find it when they're going to rebuild the road, and we do it
anyway
then.
And jump in. Yeah.
Right. But if we can't, we have demand, we just go ahead and do it. Some cities will change their restoration requirements so that, no, we want you to rebuild the whole road, for 20 miles around it, kind of thing. But I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to
Why
make
not? Yeah. Money
go
tight. Here's a guy with some money coming. Let's see what we can get out of it.
Let's see what we do. So
but
we've
that's
negotiated.
Not a retrade. That's not a retrade.
No, but that, for us, and that's one thing Maine has done pretty well is that the regulation around local distribution pipes like us is pretty ministerial. We know what to do. It's DOT permits and all that, but we can pretty much go. But, when the locals, like Rockland are really against it, and we're not going to fight that. We it's not, although, we're starting to think about what our stomach is for fighting because, it feels like we're being shouted down by the lesser of our angels, that the people that really don't have Maine's best interest at heart.
I do feel like you're on the right side of history. I don't feel like it's, you're not trying to get someone to go backwards environmentally. You're bringing people forward, but not as far as things that basically haven't been invented yet. Solar is a wonderful toy that we all like to say, oh, look, solar, that'll be great. But to your point, if it's 4% of our power, it's a toy. It's not. And let's have a bigger toy every year. I love it.
That's right. No, that's fine. But so long as I can still, there's a great book by Meredith Anglin called Shorting the Grid.
Shorting the Grid. I got it right here.
Yeah. And it talks about how these auctions work. And what we've done is we've monkeyed with the rules to incentivize the solar guys where they get paid when they produce and they get paid like 28 cents now a kilowatt.
20 cents a kilowatt. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they bid zero. So they make sure they get in. And so the gas guy has to sit on his hands or the nuclear guy sits on their hands. Well, they still got to pay their whole 100% of capital. And that's what, if we can find a way to not distort the market, then I'm with you. But I think what we've done with solar and wind, and even with all of that, we're still at 4%. But it just feels like,
Maine's got a wonderful superpower in all the people who come and love its beauty and bring their wealth for the summer.
Right.
But you get the feeling that the superpower has an ugly underbelly where they don't
want it to change.
They don't have interest in pragmatic economic growth. In a way, it's like, and I'm sure no one actually thinks this, but like there is a certain like, gee, if they're really poor, my lawn will be mowed, really like there seems to be kind of a resistance to the regular ugly work of growing a state if you're not doing something quaint.
But I think that's fair ball. But I also think that in your experience with Athena Health, if I'd have told you when you were thinking about locating here that we were going to demand shift, and there would be periods of times where I couldn't tell you when, but where we would call you and tell you can't have electricity.
Right. It'd be over. It would be, and I was.
You're a Mainer. You're a Mainer. And it would have been over.
Looked at Charlie Cawley's, huge operations jealously. I wanted, if you guys had said we may just cut you off.
But Jonathan, that's the point. You are a Mainer. You love us. You're one of us.
Completely gone native, but there's no way I could go to my board and say, yeah, we might just have to cut off your electricity.
And that's what's happening now. Like we have this boom in the world around AI data centers. Yeah, I'm sure you've read about it. These things use as much gas as Summit Natural Gas uses in a day. So what I use in a day, that one data center uses in a day. Are they going to locate in Maine or New England? No. Are any of the tech jobs around that support those things, are they going to be here? No. Are they coming? Yes. Is this reshored manufacturing going to come to Maine? No, because we don't have an energy cost to compete, and that's the crime.
And when you're a natural resource exporter, that's not a place where you would imagine being the first place to be net zero. You're actually harvesting trees, you're actually mining, you're actually growing stuff. That's hard to do with a battery. There's a lot of things you can do with a battery. You can design web pages, you can do all kinds of very high economic rent producing things. But our stem cell, our kernel are these natural resources, things that just don't lend themselves unless you just crush them and shrink them, which seems like
I
a
think that's right, and I think we've really missed the boat on that. We've missed this notion that part of our responsibility is to provide an environment for business, for jobs, for economic growth, so people have an opportunity to better themselves. And that has sorely been missed. And now, with Dragon Cement, I mean, you can count. There are 10 companies in Maine, and you know how I know that is look at the back of your 10K shirt the next time you run one. It's just,
that's all of them.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And
every one of them getting the Maine handshake.
That's right.
Can I have? Because there's just not that many people to ask.
That's right.
We didn't cover nuclear. There is Seabrook right next door. Do they sell into our?
Into ISO. That's right. Yeah. So about you said about 20% of ISO New England's power is nuclear. I think there's a couple in Massachusetts and Seabrook. I think there are 3 on the system, 2 or 3.
And what's Maine's attitude on adding that back, Maine Yankee, or there's such new technology there compared to the old.
I think we're very much Luddites. We want wind and solar, and that's all we want because it's free and easy. But I mean, I think one of my favorite quotes by Winston Churchill is that Americans will eventually do the right thing, but only after they've tried everything else. I think we're at the trying everything else stage right now. I think our grid to be.
I actually think that's a very positive way of looking at it. There's nothing wrong with the idealism. Well, maybe we could be all net zero. All right, let's go for it. And you had Biden dumping money down. Hand over fist, billion. Okay, that's great. And we got our $1.9 trillion worth of cool toys. What do we got? What does it do? Let's figure out how to now practically use it without screwing regular people out of it.
That's a sober look, right? So what's our sober look? We can create, this nuclear power. The Navy, I'm partial to the Navy, obviously. But the Navy's been running nuclear ships since 1954.
Right.
Perfectly. So we know how to do a small nuclear reactor, right? We can do that. And I think, for baseload carbon-free power, it's nuclear.
Yeah. This is the irony is that if you include nuclear, like we could stop doing carbon tomorrow.
Oh, and you have gas peaker plant. You make a nuclear power plant that would run 100% of the time at this level.
And then you do your peaks with natural gas or solar, whatever you want, but you would have a totally different profile.
The problem with solar or wind is they can't tell you when it's going to happen.
Decide when it'll be there.
Right. You're going to have and so there's places for solar power, there's places for wind power, but here, where it's cold and if you don't have power, people will die. It's as simple as that. Not to mention that SAPI shuts down and people don't have a job and all those bad things that happen.
And people won't come. We've got a reputation problem where not only are we sort of experiencing learned helplessness, but corporations, the Staubach Group, who does site location analysis, they've kind of got a little bit of a learned helplessness where Maine is concerned, where they say, may just want to move on. A little complicated there when they're doing their board presentations.
Yeah, it's too hard.
Too messy, too hard, too inconsistent.
Yeah.
What do you think? In 10 years, things go right. It's 2035. What do we look like? How are we heating ourselves? How big are we? What does it look like?
10 years is such a short timeline. I think this election matters a lot. I think that thinkers, guys like you that have been around, that have run a business, that have been around the political world a little, are absolutely required right now. We can't play anymore.
Maine's never had a CEO governor ever?
No, I don't think so. But we have been to the toy store for a couple of years now in terms of trying all this other stuff, especially on energy.
Yep.
And I would hope that, we had a governor that actually went to the United Nations and lauded the notion that we didn't have enough pipe capacity into New England, that talked about that as a success, as does the current governor of Massachusetts. That has to change. We have to get more capacity in New England that will allow us to attract some of this new opportunity. I mean, if you could get gas that was just competitive, Henry Hub is, I think, just under $4 today. If you could get $4 gas into Maine, as opposed to,
You were talking about in Arkansas, 8. What's the matter with that? I mean, if we're
well, that was in a bad winter storm, Jonathan. That was it. It was that much. Normally but if we could get to 4, well, now the things that make Maine so terrific tip the scale.
Yeah.
Right. Just get competitive. I don't have to be number one.
If we can't get you pregnant, you're not moving here.
Right. If I can,
we got to get you pregnant, and that seems like a lot of work. I'm not sure.
If I could get you to 25th in energy, now I can have a conversation with a data center.
Yeah.
Peter Del Greco at Maine Company can have a conversation with a manufacturing facility. But at this point, that you have to want to be here. When we did the Midcoast, we had a study done around, demographically. Does it look like where we are? Does it make sense?
Yeah. Like Michael Porter, kind of competitive of geography.
That 360 look and all. So we hired this consultant who was fabulous, and he started off the presentation when he reported back out. He says, "Well, I just want to start off with, you have to have a stomach for doing business in Maine. If you do, then your ROI will be about the same as where you are now. But let me show you this other demographic where you can make money."
You're going to take a fat lip. Matt Jacobson, you are a passionate and beautiful man. Thank you very much for lending your thoughts to the Maine For Keeps podcast.
Well, thank you.
See you. I hope we bring this into a nice policy platform that you like some of, and that we socialize around this state as time goes on.
However I can help with this, I think you're absolutely onto the right things. I think we have to have this discussion in a sober way, and I love the way you're doing it. And a little humor, a little fun, but really talking about what's true. And I think that's an important piece right now. So thank you. I appreciate being part of it.
Thank you very much, buddy. Appreciate it. This has been the Maine For Keeps podcast. I'm Jonathan Bush, and that is Matt Jacobson. Thanks for tuning in to Maine For Keeps. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on social media, click and share with your friends, or get on to mainforkeeps.com. If you have ideas for new content or podcast guests, or if you'd like to give us some money to support the effort, be sure to click and send. We're at team@mainforkeeps.com, and I'm at jb@mainforkeeps.com. Thanks. See you soon.